Welcome to Franky D Crafter. I'm Franky, and this week we'll be crafting a beautiful hilltop. I feel like the versatility of this project is incredible, and I feel like I'll be using this project a lot for outdoor encounters. Let's get started. Why do I think this project is essential to the channel? Well, something I wasn't enjoying about my games anymore was that my table felt flat. Although we were playing with three-dimensional objects, it still somehow felt flat. There was no verticality. I like my players to be tactical and take advantage of all the terrain. And this includes things like the high ground. This is where the Hilltop project comes in. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share if you find my content useful. And if you don't want to miss out on any upcoming projects, don't forget to ring that bell. Alright, now let's get started for real. We need to build the base for the project before we do anything else. I'm not doing anything fancy here. The idea is to simply cut a base. I should have layered this a bit better to avoid warping later. It wasn't an issue, although I shouldn't have taken the risk. I cut half an oval shape as the side for the hill. I then cut the first layer of cardboard, making sure not to cut too deep. This is just to be able to bend the cardboard without messing up its structural strength. Then I get to gluing it on the base. I cut a section off the top because I want this area to be flat. This is where I outline the top of the hill. I'm still just using cardboard for now. And then I just hot glue it to the top. You might need to hold this for a while to make sure that it completely bonds. There is a small area here that didn't bond too well. Don't worry about making the bond look perfect. We will be covering most of the project up with other material anyways. The plan is to make a solid structure as the skeleton for our project for now. I wanted to elevate my game. I wanted a piece that would stand as an obstacle for my players, but at the same time, an advantageous place where my players can hold their ground. I wanted a playable, elevated platform that would also look really nice as a display. I knew that the top of the hill had to be special. That's why I left it blank, allowing me to change the top of the hill depending on what the session called for that week. The top of the hill will basically be a plain surface, a clean slate for me to add whatever the encounter calls for that week. I'm using one of the goblin houses to measure how big I want this plane to be. After that, I add a single step to the top of the hill. Why? Well, because it's my hill, that's why. Next has to be my favorite part about the project, playing puzzle pieces with the tree bark. Just make sure you sanitize any material you catch in the wild. There are a few ways to do this, like boiling them. In the real world, our constitution points are ass. This is where I start to think about how playable this piece will be. I'm using my trusty goblin warrior, Wakan, to choose pieces that will make it so that my miniatures stand upright while on them. After all that, I pick up some of my scraps and check where I can fill some of my empty spaces on the cliffside. Time to make everything come together. But first, let's add a layer of protection and some texture to the ground. I don't pull any punches here with my PVA glue. I go in. Then I spread it around with a beat up brush. I make sure to get the bark as well. This will give it a layer of protection. And just like that, we will start adding some sand. Since I added glue to the stones too, I want to make sure I'm careful to only get the sand on the paths and not on the stones. This is the part where you'll need Sculptable. This is becoming one of my favorite materials. I'll use it to hide any cardboard that is still exposed. I'm not worried about how I put it on since I want it to seem rocky anyways. This is also where I take the opportunity to hide the sides of the base. The only tricky part is when I get to the front of the hill. This is where your placement has to be a bit more strategic. You want to maintain that playability and ensure that you can still place minis on the side. For the top, I try to maintain it as flat as possible. Try it is the key word here. Let's start to primer this and actually make it look wholesome. I'm using black Mod Podge mix here to add yet another layer of protection. And then I get started with some gray. I don't want to get into all the cracks here so that I can still keep some contrast. I continue by adding a dry brush of white to the whole thing. I tend to do this at this point of the project for a few reasons. The first being that after this point, my colors will apply so much better. And second, it will help me pick out areas that I want to bring attention to later on. It is at this point that I will ask you to ignore the houses on the back. These aren't the goblin houses you're looking for. Let's move along to adding the brown on the ground. Then I basically highlight the path with a lighter brown. Using the same light brown, I dry brush the rest of the stones. Well, it's more of a thick dry brush, if that makes sense. I work my way down the tones with another dry brush. This time, vanilla color. And lastly, white. It's time to flock the flock out of this. This is where you can choose to make the hills a bit more realistic and prep better flocking. Or you can do like me and work some color in there. I tend to pick out shapes in the grass and start with a darker green in the middle and work my way out to a yellow. I do understand that by doing so, I add a cartoony sense to the hill. That's what I aim to do. I'd be lying to you if I told you that I wasn't 100% influenced by video games. And on the other hand, this allows me to build an even more intense contrast within the piece itself. And to spice things up, I will be adding more greenery to the hill. I'm just pinning a few overgrown plastic weeds with super glue. It's at this point that I take a risk that might not pay off. Or maybe I should have tested it on something else first. Oh well, you'll have to be the judge of this in the comment section below. This is macaroni in the shape of stars. I think they look enough like flowers, so let's see if I can make them work. I sprinkled them in patches here and there. I don't want to overdo it, especially since I've never tested this before. I add another layer of PVA glue to the top of these flowers just to be safe. I start to paint the magenta. Thinking back, I should have added some white to start them off with. Oh well, again. I then add a purplish wash. And then I add a few other colors to the flowers and call it a day. If you want to add more color, go ahead and add some mushrooms, because why not? If you want to learn how to craft these, check out a previous video I made on them before. I'll leave the timestamp on the description of that video, for your convenience sake. And the last step is that I hit this with a black null wash, but only in the areas where I want more intense shadows. Another step that I usually don't show on any of my videos, but I surely do them, is spray them with something that will protect your project. I plan to make more playable dioramas for the channel. It's not a secret that I am heavily influenced by video games, and I plan to show my true colors more than ever this year. Next week, I'll show you how I made the homes for the goblins. There's a cherry on top. But for now, check out some of my other videos. And like always, let's thank the patrons, because if it wasn't for them, none of these videos would be possible. If you'd like to further support the channel, don't forget to check the Patreon link in the description below. Love you peeps. Peace!